Hello, and welcome to Breast Cancer Conversations, a podcast brought to you by SurvivingBreastCancer.org. I am Laura Carfing, breast cancer survivor and founder of SurvivingBreastCancer.org, a nonprofit organization providing community, education, and resources to empower those diagnosed with breast cancer and their caregivers from day one and beyond. Hello everyone, and welcome to Breast Cancer Conversations. I am so excited to be starting another week with you guys, and today's guest is no stranger to surviving breast cancer nor the podcast. Her name is Stephanie McLeod-Estevez, and she is our art therapy teacher. So once a month, she teaches workshops for our surviving breast cancer community. I know a lot of you out there already know this lovely, amazing soul. And I am just so excited because when I met Stephanie, gosh, I don't even know how many months or years ago now, but when I met Stephanie, it was like an instant connection, not just because of, breast cancer uniting us and becoming fast and furious friends, but honestly, because she has a way of connecting with people, just taking a deep dive into compassion and empathy and really believing in, the true beauty that we all have. So I am just so honored and so thrilled to be having Stephanie on today's podcast. If you want to find out more or RSVP for one of Stephanie's future art therapy workshops, hop on over to survivingbreastcancer.org/events, and you can find out all the information right there.
It always in the back of my head, I was like, maybe I'll get cancer one day. And so, sure enough, 14 years later, I'm diagnosed with triple negative breast cancer.
Today, Stephanie is going to share not only her own personal experience with breast cancer, but what it was like when she found out that her mother was diagnosed and ultimately passed away from metastatic disease. She talks about how she turned to art therapy as her modality for healing, as well as, drumroll please, announcing her new book, Beautiful Boobs. So we have so much to dive into today.
Art therapy is so good at helping you experience and express your pain, but it actually is a great amplifier for what brings you joy, what brings you hope, what brings you, the title of the book that I've written is Beautiful Boobs, because ultimately, when you lean into your story and you honor it and validate it and you connect with your inner creative, you feel really good.
Welcome to the conversation. Take me back to the beginning. And I don't know for you if the beginning is, your education and your career going into art therapy, or if the beginning is, experiencing your mother's diagnosis, or if the beginning for you is your diagnosis. I feel like this continuum is never a straight line. So,
oh my gosh,
where would you like to begin?
Where should I begin? So I definitely think that I would have probably never become an art therapist if I hadn't experienced my mom's cancer. And so it's like the beginning in my mind is, but I was always really interested in people and their, their hearts and their souls and all that sort of stuff. But it was really, I think, my mom's breast cancer, and it was her second cancer. So she was diagnosed when I was 19 was her primary cancer. And I was off in college and she was like, with my blessing, please go, just live your life. Treatment went pretty well. Her sister had been through breast cancer herself. I don't know how many years apart they were, but maybe about 7. And so, we kind of were like, okay, things went fine for my Aunt Julie. And things went okay for my mom, she went through her treatment. And then I returned back from school. It was already done and things were fine. She was a therapist. I was always like, I'm a social justice person. And but then when I was 25, her cancer returned. And, I was living in Boston actually at the time, working as a social worker. And it was pretty, very different outcome. Like my aunt, her sister, more than 30 years now has never had a recurrence of cancer. But my mom, she had just finished the Appalachian Trail, the through hike from Georgia to Maine.
How special.
Yeah. Super special, this huge crowning life achievement. And she came back and she went to see her oncologist just for a regular checkup. And he found a spot on her neck that he was concerned about. And sure enough, it did end up turning out to be stage 4 breast cancer. And it was everywhere.
Wow. And no
And it
symptoms or
was,
anything else. Like she wouldn't have really known.
well, so she did get really bad lymphedema on the trail. And so that was probably a symptom that things were starting to back up. And then I remember asking her, I was like, Mom, how did you not know that this was happening? I mean, and I granted, like, I think the signs can be subtle. And she was like, everybody was complaining about pain on the trail. So I just assumed my pain was no different. And yeah. So when she got diagnosed, it was a few months before, from knowing that till I made the decision to return home, because I just sort of felt like, this is one of those pivotal moments in your life. And I didn't really want to just wait for phone calls and treatment updates or, like I felt like I needed to be there.
Mm-hmm.
And my brother actually moved home too. And initially things were going pretty well until it went into her spine and her brain. And then that was kind of like the beginning of the end. So she passed her 1-year anniversary of finishing the Appalachian Trail and died like 2 weeks later.
So a very aggressive disease.
Super aggressive. And, I think like they did everything they could do. And like she had, intensive chemotherapy. And then she went through radiation. And then they actually did like chemo in her brain. And that, I think, that was kind of her tipping point of like, it was so, I think, unnerving to her that she couldn't go there. And so once she made the decision to stop treatment, she died within like 2 weeks. And it was obviously one of the hardest things I ever went through, but it was also one of the most important moments in my life, to like, I was only 26 years old. I was newly married. I was trying to figure out who the heck I was. And then, the rug was ripped out from underneath me. But it really sensitized me to, first of all, how complicated it is to truly heal from devastating loss and how common grief is. And there's so many different forms of grief that don't even get acknowledgement. And so I began to see that in my own life and the lives of others. And I felt like I really wanted to be part of the solution. And so that's actually what led me to become an art therapist, because I'd always been creative. But there's just something that drew me to it. And then once I started practicing and I saw how powerful it was as a storytelling medium, especially for traumatic life incidents that are difficult to put into words, it really it was a game changer for me in my healing process with my mom. And it just sort of helped me learn how to navigate that kind of ever evolving healing process while also feeling more joyful, more alive, more connected to myself and what mattered most. And so it was really important. It's really important to me. And so I was super grateful. And, it always in the back of my head, I was like, maybe I'll get cancer one day. And so, sure enough, 14 years later, I'm diagnosed with triple negative breast cancer. And it was stage 3A. I was 40 years old. My kids were 5 and 7. And I remember one of my first reactions was like, seriously, do I have to learn everything through experiential things? Like, I'm really good listener.
And was your mother, do you know, was she triple negative also?
I tried to find out, but the thing was, and, it's interesting. So when she died, I knew that there was a 7-year limit on requesting her medical records. And I think I just wasn't emotionally capable of going there. And then I processed with my oncologist on multiple occasions. Would that really have mattered? And honestly, it didn't. It doesn't matter. What does matter is she certainly is the person I got my BRCA2 genetic mutation from. It's her side of the family. So, but that I was obviously able to find out through testing on my own. But it was, so then I was like, okay, fine. And, but the thing is that there was also this weird peacefulness of like, finally I had an answer to that kind of question that had been in the back of my mind. And I share that because I think we need to be really open with that. Like, our life experiences are often multifaceted and, bring up all sorts of stuff. And it's not necessarily all in the quote unquote positive or all in the negative category. It's normally like a mixture of everything.
Yes, in one of our recent Feature Fridays, we were talking about positivity and how there is such a thing as toxic positivity, right? When you're just overly positive and almost to the sense of being in denial. And that isn't to say that we are not hopeful and that we're not positive, but that there's this element and this balance of what I like to call realistic optimism, right? Like I'm optimistic and I'm positive, but there's a realist approach to how I take that. How do you experience positivity?
To me, the positivity is like, it's always a balancing act, right? Like if you are not pressuring yourself, because I think what happens is that there's a lot of pressure, right? Like pressure to be strong, pressure to be positive, pressure, to whatever, fill in the blank. And so for the most part, as a therapist, right? So it's like, here I was, like, I got my clinical side and then I have my lived experience side. It's all about like, how much grace are you giving yourself to like feel what you got to feel? And yes, that includes feeling good and positive and hopeful, and just without that like deep pressure or fear that if you expose a negative thought or a difficult feeling, that's not going to like, send you down this path of like, whatever your greatest fear is.
We have society also telling us like, oh, you look great. You're so positive.
Yes.
You're so strong. Just exactly what you were saying, that when you get home or walk in the door, you're like, but I feel like shit. I'm not okay. I'm a mental mess.
Right.
Like, but everyone thinks I'm supposed to be great and happy and positive. And so it's this turmoil of, factors coming in at you at warp speed. And how do you make sense of all of that?
Yeah. And I always, when people are like, how do I support someone who's going through it? It's like, hey, acknowledge what you admire about how they're managing the situation, but please leave space for saying like, well, what's it really like for you? That's, I think, all we really need, because there are times where, like, I think there's parts of treatment that are super empowering, like you are facing like some of the greatest fears that people, when they imagine like, what's my worst case scenario? And it's like, there's something really empowering about that. But also just making that opportunity, right, to let people go where they need to go and just trust, it's like, hey, wherever you're at, I believe you,
And so where does art therapy fall into all of this?
Art therapy is so good at helping you like experience and express your pain, but it actually is a great amplifier for what brings you joy, what brings you hope, what brings you, like the title of the book that I've written is Beautiful Boobs, because like ultimately when you lean into your story and you honor it and validate it and you connect with your inner creative, you feel really good. There is like, it's this like kind of confounding thing, but the more that you try it, the more that you practice it, it's like, woo. So, for that particular reader, I'd be curious to know, like, what are her practices for keeping herself hopeful and feeling strong and embodied and all of that good stuff,
Yes. So hopefully there'll be like a sequel and a follow-up to that post for sure.
Yeah, I know. And that's the other thing about writing, right? We do our best to try to like, honestly, writing, I think, is a great, conversation starter, so I'm glad, that you've created a community in which they want to reply and say, hey, like, I agree, but I disagree too.
Can you tell me more about your book? I know I'm just totally skipping over your diagnosis right now, and I know we will get to that, but I'm so curious. Tell me about Beautiful Boobs. What can someone expect, and how does that amplify what you're doing with art therapy? It sounds like you're able to reach so many more people.
Okay, so let's go there, and then I'll tell you how my story like really fed the book. But so when I think about what's the simplest way to describe art therapy is it's truly like a language. It's a form of communication in which you are trying to express something that is within you, whether it's a memory, a thought, a feeling, a judgment, whatever it is that you've got going on that you're kind of working through. Words are actually a translation of our experience, right? Like our experience, our living in this body is really energetic, and so words are like an interpretation or a translation of that experience, but they sometimes they get us so stuck in the head, it's like we're cerebrally cut off from our experience. And or when you go through something traumatic, your brain can't always get to that word place until it works through the trauma. And so art kind of begins to serve this mechanism of not just telling your story, but beginning to help you sort of release that energy and somehow show it to yourself. And, through different colors, shape, or form. And you don't have to be actually an art therapist an artist to benefit, because it's not about painting a Monet, it's really about like, I went through this thing, I need to represent it somehow visually. Maybe it's in a specific image, maybe it's through like more abstract art. It's kind of just about trying to capture it as best as you can. And then what happens is that you begin to find your words again. And that is very comforting, when you're able to communicate through the language that, others want you to talk in, like you can't go to the doctor and like grunt or, be like, oh, let me like show you my energy. Like if you did an amazing interpretive dance, they might be like, that's cool, but I don't know how to interpret that. I need your words. So even what I found is that through our therapy, it makes it even easier to talk to others about what your experience is. Of course, like anything, it's normal to have some performance anxiety, but the more that you practice it, the more attuned your body gets, and your spiritual self and your mental self. They're like, ooh, we get to like discuss through this, art form, what's happening inside. And so it becomes easier over time. When you're really feeling comfortable, it's called ESP, because you feel like all of a sudden you understand yourself in this like almost like it's so magical or like otherworldly at times, but it's express, soothe, and process, right? So express is trying to tell what's happening as we are, taking that time to honor our experience, to talk about it. You start to feel soothed, and especially in your nervous system, all that tension that our bodies hold on from trying to survive a traumatic experience begins to get released. And then the process is where you start to draw conclusions or meaning or greater understanding of what you've been through, how it's affecting you today, and what you need.
The two follow-up questions to that. So it sounds like there's a little bit of like a meditative process that goes on as well.
Very much so.
Okay. And then, how many like sessions or how much art does one have to create to experience this magic?
I would say that honestly, just one time can lead you
even
to
me, I can practice
understanding.
this and then feel amazing.
Yeah, you really can. You know why? Because you're listening to yourself. You're feeling seen and heard. I've been a therapist since, 2004, nearly 20 years. And I do all kinds of therapy. Talking is a very important part of my craft.
Mm-hmm.
But, the work that I can see get accomplished in a single art therapy session is like, it's just transformative. It's almost like it's like pressing fast forward, not in like a pressured way, but in a like, those juicy aha moments where all of
Yeah.
a sudden you get it. And when you're only relying on words, you might spend several months trying to talk about one thing.
Mm-hmm.
And then art just sort of like, it kind of bypasses that because it taps into
Yeah.
your less conscious experience. And so sometimes for me, sometimes it feels like I'm dreaming while I'm awake. You know how in our dreams, we can do a lot of
Mm-hmm.
work, working
Yes.
through things,
Completely,
Yeah.
to have those breakthrough moments. Totally.
Yeah, exactly. But what normally happens is that you do have to practice for a little while because, again, our performance anxiety is often sitting on our shoulders.
Mm-hmm.
So the more you practice, the easier it gets, kind of
Yeah.
thing.
Great.
Yeah.
And so you were practicing as a therapist when you got your
Yes.
diagnosis.
Yep. I sure was. Yep. And my clients went through me bald and puffy from steroids. It's like, okay, we're gonna do this. I maneuvered my schedule. So I like see a few clients in the morning and then I go have chemo. And then I would try to keep it like condensed to this so I could have the end of the week where I felt really crummy off. It was good. And what I realized was, there had been so much that had changed, right, in treatment for the good, in terms of more options, more types of medications. My mom passed away in 2000. So this is 2014. And I was grateful for how many advances, had happened in that time. I mean, medicine is incredible. And you're just kind of surviving the process. So I did chemo first, and knowing that I'm an art therapist, I was like, okay, like I'm gonna get a bilateral mastectomy. That was like something I always kind of knew because it was like the one thing my mom didn't do. And I know that doesn't necessarily mean that I won't have a recurrence. But again, we learn from history, and I was like, hey, she didn't do that, I'll do that. And hopefully my outcome will be better. So in the meantime, you're kind of just trying to survive life, and I started with my husband doing all of these like breast casts, which is like you use plaster Paris and you're kind of essentially making like this little frame of yourself, like women do it when they get pregnant, that kind of thing. And we made so many of them that my kids were like, why do you keep doing that? And my younger one, who is 5, one of the ones that I haven't painted yet was like, I did this one where it was actually from my bald head all the way down below my breasts. And so I'm lying on the kitchen floor and my kids are like, why is she doing this? And couldn't really talk because I had stuff all over my face. And my younger one was like, he's like, well, they knew I was going for surgery soon. So they're like, well, when they take her boobs off, she's going to wear those, And I was like, you're so stinking smart, like that was cool, And then like treatment ends and I'm like, yay, I'm sure survivorship is so much better than it used to be. And there was at least a meeting, right? And there was at least an acknowledgement that like, hey, sister, like you might not be in quote unquote active treatment anymore, but this is not at all done. And then, she's like, I don't really like these resources, but I'm going to hand them to you anyways. It was just kind of like generic pamphlets. And I remember being like, first of all, in this place of like, oh my God, like what just happened, right? Like, the adrenaline is starting to leave your body and you're just like trying to like really like, did I really just go through all of that? And then I have her saying like, sorry, there's not much I can offer you. And I was like, oh, this is not good. But it began to help me understand like why, not that this happened to me only because it's the only way that I could like get to this next part of my life, like my truly what feels like my life purpose. But I began to say like, this is unacceptable. And I feel like, it's such a wherever you land, like I know I'm really lucky to be med, no matter where you are on that spectrum, you still deserve to live as well as you can, and that means having good mental and emotional health. And so I went back to my roots in art therapy and as a therapist, and I was like, well, if I'm going to understand what just happened to me, I think I'm going to have to explore what just happened to me. And so I started telling the anniversary of my diagnosis, the 1 year anniversary, I sat down and I painted on one of my boob breast casts, my diagnosis experience. And then I wrote some poetry. And then, a few months later, I sat down for my mastectomy and I did that. Oh no, chemo. So I did that, then chemotherapy. I decided to keep it in this initial cast in the order of my treatment, right? Because when you tell a story, you start at the beginning, right? And then you're like, so I went to diagnosis, then I went through chemo, and then I went through bilateral mastectomy, and then I had radiation, and then I wonder what the hell just happened to me. And then I had reconstruction, and then I went through an oophorectomy, and then I sat with my survivor guilt, and then so I painted it all out.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
So you kept going and returning back to that initial cast to add it to that piece.
Well, so that is what the book instructs people to do, because I think we only can have so many boobs lying around our house, but because it's because I had so many of them, I have not painted over them, but I think that's more from a where I hope to go and how I want to spread awareness and knowledge, not just within the breast cancer community, but helping caregivers understand, as well as providers, including therapists, because some of the core challenges of cancer is people dealing with the 4 universal fears. And that's a whole other conversation, but a lot of therapists have hangups on dying and being alone and blah, blah, blah. So
what are the 4 universal fears? I don't even know what they are.
I'll tell you.
I probably have all of them.
So the 4, yeah, exactly. We all do. They're universal for a reason. These are sort of the existential dilemmas, right? They're existential because ultimately we do experience them in some shape or form. Some of us more obvious or with greater awareness, especially, and you'll understand in just a moment why all 4 are experienced by anybody diagnosed with cancer. So the first one is the fear of dying. The second one is the fear of being alone. The third is the fear of losing freedom. And the fourth is the fear of losing your sense of purpose or meaning in life.
Wow.
So if you were to think about your personal cancer experience, do you feel like you've faced those at some point?
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah.
Spot on.
100%. And what do we know about fear? It can drive so many buses to places we don't want to go. So we have to learn how to ride with them, how to ground, how to acknowledge, how to reframe, whatever it is. Yeah.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I was having a conversation with William the other day, going through one of these experiences, and I was like, all right, they told me to acknowledge my experience. How am I feeling? What were the triggers? What happened around this time that I'm feeling this way?
Yes.
And then now what? I was left on this okay, I'm doing it. I'm doing what they're telling me to do, but what next? And then I was continuing to read, and they actually put the analogy as a wave. And that when you're having these cravings or feelings or emotions of anxiety, and please correct me, I'm not the therapist or anything like that.
Right. No,
but they were saying good. On average, it was about 20 to 30 minutes that you feel these really intense emotions that peak just like a wave. And then as you come down from the wave, it starts to settle out. So that might actually goes back to what you were saying with the ESP techniques as well. So it's growing and then you soothe. And I love that.
Which is why we did that, how art therapy can be your, what was it? The emotional first aid kit. right?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Because I think it's not so much that we can't, but like we feel like we can't. And so something like art therapy can be like literally with you on that wave,
Yeah.
and what I've observed, and that, people often will say like, well, how can you think about painful things? It's like, well, trust me, these painful things are inside of you. They are coming out one way or another.
Yes.
But if we can invite them and we lean into it, like I remember the very first time I sat down to paint on my cast, and I'm, a therapist. I've done lots of personal therapy myself of all types and stripes. And I knew this was going to be a big moment for me. And I sit down and I'm thinking about the day I officially learned I had breast cancer. And I, anticipated being emotional. But you know what? The first thing I felt was pure joy, because I was touching my body.
Yes.
And it was beautiful. And I was like floored. I was like, I've never experienced this before in my life.
Wow.
Yeah.
I love, that's so beautiful. Yeah. Amazing.
Yeah.
And probably something you weren't expecting, right? Like you almost put this foresight into, okay, this is going to be a really great day. I'm going to, have my favorite cup of tea or whatever your routine is. And then something is like, wow, I wasn't experiencing that. And that was even better.
Even better. And then it was like the other stuff like whooshed on out of me, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like I wish I had my boobs here. I call them my stackable boobs. They're boobs in a box. I'll show you some. I'll show you some pictures. Well, there's some pictures actually on the website, which we'll talk about eventually. But yeah, and it was just like I rode that wave.
Mm-hmm.
And then this incredible poetry came thereafter, which was really delicious and like expressed so much more. And then I wrote in my journal, and then I went back upstairs, back into my life.
Yeah.
And it was so I did all of that. And then I began to realize like, as much as I want to do for the breast cancer community, like I'm only one person, right? So I need to like be able to spread my message as far as possible. And that is when the book idea started percolating. And I'll show you, this is her in folder form.
Ooh, I love it.
So this is just a little mock-up that I did. But the official title is Beautiful Boobs. Well, right now anyways, the working title is How to Move from Surviving to Thriving with Breast Cancer Using Art Therapy.
I love that. Yeah. And is it written more as like a novel or like a how-to with workbooks and exercises? What can someone expect?
So I'm in the process of looking for a publisher or an agent or whomever. So for those of you who might know these two writers, I believe it's like a beautiful compilation of their styles. So Julia Cameron wrote The Artist's Way like many years ago. Like I did her book back in college years, back in 91, 92 or whatever. And her book was this cool, her book really inspired the format of this book. So in her book, she was talking about how so many of us are cut off from our creativity, and that our creativity is actually like something that we all are, it's our birthright. We might look different depending on who you are, but it's often through our experiences that our unique creative voice gets like shut down or maybe underappreciated or just not like reinforced the way. And your creative voice is also like your inner guide, your inner wise woman, she's your intuitive self. So they're really like, you can't really have one without the other. So you need them to connect. So in this book, like she structured it to sort of unpack her theory of how to heal essentially your creative voice. And so each chapter would be like her thoughts and introduction of different themes. And then at the end, she would say, well, she had a couple of things you were supposed to do every day. The first thing that she wanted you to do was wake up and write for 15 minutes in the morning, like whatever was on your top of mind, without editing. Now, I don't have people necessarily do that with this book, but that piece of like unedited free write is an important part of understanding and tapping in. And then at the end, she had these reflective questions or suggestions or like mini dates to take yourself so that by the end of the book, you are way more connected to your creative self, right? So the structure of my book is that the first part of the book is, because I'm not necessarily going to be sitting with you in the room, there's a lot of information I want you to understand, right?
Yeah.
So that you can get prepared to take this on either, on yourself individually. Like I have great fantasies of like support groups having these books.
Yes, I was going to say like the nurse navigators, the oncologists, absolutely part of the library repertoire.
Exactly. What exactly is art therapy? So trying to dispel any anxieties about that. Why is it so important to look at the emotional toll cancer has on us? How does art kind of match that? When you're feeling resistance or uncertainty, how do you face that, about the process? And then like some other chapters that are like, what kind of supplies you need. You can decide, the breast cast is kind of difficult to replace because again, you're painting on yourself, but women can also do this on a canvas because understandably, we don't all have that maybe the space or the time, the collaboration. I have a woman who was able to do her own breast cast herself, which I thought was pretty impressive. So the first part is like, hey, I'm going to prep you for success. And then the second part of the book is when women can really pioneer their healing to their unique experience, right? Because you and I both have breast cancer. We have different things that we went through. Like your story isn't exactly identical to mine.
Right.
And so the point in that section is, hey, like reclaim your authenticity, your voice, your power. You get to decide what you want to do. So there's like the technical stuff, like telling the story of your diagnosis or your treatment or your surgery, right? And then there's the deeper, harder to see things like anxiety,
yes.
Survivor guilt, that sort of stuff. And then there's body image stuff, so then by the end of it, the hope is that you've taken that time. Like what my process allowed me to do was not to live in fear, to feel like I had gotten as much closure as I could get. We know we're going to have different anniversaries, markers, and milestones that might trip us up. And then you can go back to the book and work it when you're feeling those.
Yeah, what I like about this dialogue just right now, you're helping me connect some of my own personal dots, right? Where we have a lot of conversations about, I just need to feel in control. But then what happens when I lose that control? And what you're actually talking about is this process of breaking through all of that and letting it kind of flow out of you versus trying to hold on to something so guarded or tight.
Exactly. And when you begin to do that, it's like, I think that most women don't want to carry, breast cancer baggage around with them, right? But it feels so big and it feels most of it's so difficult to put into words, And so the goal with this book is like to give you like a container that allows you to go in and out at your own pacing of telling that story and getting that validation, etc. And then what allows you to do is that, control is normally more of a problem when we're afraid, and yet we have to recognize some of the reality, right? Sort of like that, optimistic realist or whatever the words were. And so what I have found is that it's not about control, it's about influence. We can have great influence on how we are feeling, how we're responding, how we are living when we honor what we've gone through and then learn ways of telling that story.
So at the time of this recording, your book is not yet published, but it will be soon, which I'm super excited about. What can our listeners do to stay in touch with you and get on your mailing list? And what can they expect once they're on your mailing list? Because I think you have some really excellent tools that you're giving away to all of your readers.
Yes, I want women to benefit from this ASAP, and so what I've decided to do is create a newsletter.
Awesome.
And in the newsletter, anybody who signs up, they're going to get like excerpts from the book. They're going to get, tips and tools on how to get started. I'm
Very
hoping
cool.
for like some fun prompts, and a space that ultimately we can like begin to talk and share and be in touch with me. And so the newsletter is my way of like giving this gift, because to me, it's like, I feel like, she's her own piece. I'm the channel, but I just want her to be in your inbox as soon as possible,
Oh,
Yeah.
I love that. And so people can go to your website. Do you have a website for the book, or is it through your creative transformation?
Eventually they'll all be linked up, right? But I made a website for the book, which I'm excited about. It's called, so if you go to Beautiful Boobs, the book, because
yes.
.com, right? Beautiful Boobs itself was like $12,000. I'm like, that is insane.
I know. I feel like during the .com area, everyone like grabbed like the really good ones too. I found that issue myself trying to find some domain names,
but actually I love, like, I find it so playful, like Beautiful Boobs, the book, right?
Yes.
And that playfulness is what it's our birthright too, right? And I think, like, again, that's something you can recover. But when you go to beautifulboobsthebook.com, you'll be able to sign up for the newsletter, which is actually on Substack. But you can also like learn more about the book. You can see some of the casts that I've done. You can learn a little bit more about my story. And then there are some like my beta readers who have read the book and have offered some of their perspective on what they think about the project is there too. So yeah. And then, exciting. So the newsletter is like going to be happening soon. Like my hope is to start really writing that in like September of this year, 2022. So sign up now and you won't miss any, you won't miss any of them, but there'll be archives if you catch this later in the time and you're like, no, I wasn't in on it from the beginning.
Yes, exactly. Depending on when people are listening to the podcast and everything too. So absolutely.
Exactly.
And so inform me then how this ties into the creative transformation. Am I saying it right? creativetransformations.com. Okay. Is your other website that you have, which offers, different workshops and other tools for people.
Exactly. Creative Transformations was my initial sort of response to the gaps in care that I saw. On that website, obviously there's like information about who I am, but there's, I have a Therapy Thursday blog that actually was where I practiced my writing for the book, cool. So it was kind of twofold. Like I was working through the ideas, but like, getting used to writing. And then, so Creative Transformation is still sort of like the biz in which I do the work. And the book is like what I hope will get me into more.
Yeah, it's like the scale. You're scaling up. So when was Creative Transformations launched?
Creative Transformations, I launched that in 2016. And I was like, okay, what do I want to do? Like, I know I want to work with individuals. I know I want to work with groups. I know I want to like disseminate this information and I feel like really isn't out there, or if it's out there, it's sort of being talked more as like, this is what I'm missing, but I don't know where to go to get it.
Yeah.
But as I was sort of getting to know people in the cancer community and sort of getting my name out there, I did a Twitter chat with this organization out of the UK, and they, oh my gosh, Breast Cancer Worldwide chat. Do you know them?
Yes, I do. Are they weekly or monthly? Like how often are their chats?
I'm not sure what they're currently doing, but it used to be weekly.
Yes. Okay.
And so, here it is. It's our sisters across the pond, right? As they say. And they invited me on to talk about art therapy, and we had this amazing like Twitter conversation. And there's this woman on there who was from Kenya, and she was like, hey, like I run a support group through WhatsApp.
Oh,
with
wow.
Kenyan women. She's like, because there is very little resources here.
Mm-hmm.
And she's like, would you mind coming on and talking with us? And so I did. We did a couple of different ones.
Oh, how
And
cool.
I mean, this is a worldwide phenomenon. Like
Yeah.
2 million women a year on average around the world get diagnosed with breast cancer of some
Yeah.
stage. And so anyway, so obviously, like where I'm going is just trying to first reach as many women as I can,
Mm-hmm.
then hopefully help their caregivers understand,
Yep.
and then get to the professionals and say, hey, what can we do to do this better? You
Mm-hmm.
know? Yeah.
Oh, such great
Yeah.
vision that you have for
Yeah.
helping the community. And through this process too, I'm curious, do you find that this work is healing to you? Because I know
Yes.
similarly with the work that we're doing also at Surviving Breast Cancer, or doing the podcast or doing the writing, it's, initially I was like, no, I'm doing this for others. And then it dawned on me, I'm like, no,
Mhm.
actually, this is very therapeutic for myself as well. So kind of like the after side
Yes.
effects, I guess.
It's so the after, it's like the best side effect ever, right? Like when I do something from a place of love
Mm-hmm.
with the intention to help people feel connected and sure of themselves, I ultimately am doing that for myself as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, so it's really good. Like some people, not so much anybody from the breast cancer community, but other people who, used to ask me, like, I don't know how you're a therapist. It must be so depressing. I'm like, no, it's not. It's like the most amazing. First of
Yeah.
all, I'm like constantly humbled and reminded that I'm a human being and full of faults and all that other stuff. And,
Yeah.
I'm like, gosh, we'd be a much happier world if we could feel more vulnerable to share our true selves, because the last thing you want is to feel like everybody else has got it together and I'm the one falling apart. It's like, God, no. And we're all falling apart all
Yes.
the time. It's just some of us are better at saying it and
I
supporting
know.
ourselves through
And that takes
it.
courage too. And that's not saying that everyone has to
Such
put
courage.
themselves on YouTube or online or anything as well. There's
Right.
other ways of expressing that, to your point,
Yes,
right? So,
exactly.
we were talking, someone was like, well, I really like writing. Like, why would I do a podcast if that's not my medium? Or why would I do
Right.
writing if I love to be on air and talk? Or what about video? So it's really trying to find that platform that suits
Yes.
your inner soul and your strength. So I love that.
Yeah. Your inner creative self is like, yeah, sign
Love
me up for that.
it. How can our listeners and followers and viewers find you? I know you're mentioning your websites, but like social media or
Yes.
emails. Yeah.
Absolutely. So both of the websites, creative-transformations.com, there's social media links. So the platform I probably use the most is Instagram at this time.
Okay.
I just think I love to go out and, put similar stuff to when I'm putting in the newsletter, but, some of it's just mental health in general and other stuff is more cancer specific.
Okay.
And then for my little beautiful boobs project, like she has an Instagram too. So like
Oh, I love that.
first, yeah. So please follow those, because the thing is that I want everybody to benefit as soon as possible. But the big goal, the snagging the publisher or the agent, the stronger numbers I have, that's a way to support this work going out into the hands of every woman
Mm-hmm.
diagnosed, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? And so hopefully they are like super pumped to see what I can do and provide and my thoughts, but also like it's the greatest way to support me as well,
Yeah. And
is to
the
become a
impact that you're bringing
subscriber.
to the community as well. So,
Yeah,
support you, support other people in the community, and really scale and escalate
exactly.
the support during such a traumatic
Hmm.
experience, not just during an initial diagnosis, but as you're mentioning throughout survivorship, 5, 10, 15 years. I think it's with us
Exactly.
forever, unfortunately. But there's tools out there.
Yeah,
Thanks to you.
there's tools, and my tools are perfect for someone who's stage 4 to stage 0. Like it's meant for everybody. It's not just someone who is done with active treatment, right? Because the thing is that we all deserve that care and love.
Stephanie, thank you. This has been such a fun podcast to record. Thank you for sharing all of your insight and knowledge and wisdom with our community. It was such a pleasure having you. Thank you again. And thank you all for listening and tuning in week after week here on Breast Cancer Conversations. Please be mindful that all of our content and information is for educational purposes only and is never a substitute for medical advice. If you want to hang out, again, please check out survivingbreastcancer.org/events, where you can RSVP to our Thursday Night Thrivers weekly meetup, our Movement Monday classes, workshops, seminars, and so much more. We can also continue the dialogue online via social media. Our Instagram handle is survivingbreastcancer.org, all one word, and you can follow us on Twitter at SBC_ORG. Until next time, keep on thriving.